production of the Mississippi State University Extension Service.
Today on Farm Week, John McCain takes another shot at the catfish inspection program by trying to attach a repeal to a trade bill.
In the food factor, Natasha will clear up some of the confusion about grades of beef.
In Southern gardening, native plants. They're pretty and they're made for our environment.
In the markets, beef prices remain up even with bigger supplies, while in soybeans, acres and yield trump avian flu as the big factor on price.
In the feature segment, a product we wish we could grow in the South, but we can't. Maple syrup. Tastes great on pancakes, and it's the fastest growing agricultural product in Vermont.
Nowhere else in the whole world does the sugar maple tree grow naturally, and we don't plant it. Out of every 5 hardwood trees in New England, 2 of them is the sugar maple tree.
Good day, everyone. I'm Leighton Spann.
And I'm Artis Ford. Welcome to Farm Week. Late last week, the U.S. Senate voted to give President Obama trade promotion authority on the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement.
Artis, it didn't happen without Arizona Republican Senator John McCain trying another time to stop the move of catfish inspection from the Food and Drug Administration to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. McCain tried to attach a repeal amendment to the Senate's Trade Promotion Authority bill. It's one of several times in the past few years that McCain has tried to stop the program that would inspect all catfish and catfish-like species being imported into the United States. McCain says Vietnam says the inspection program is a deal breaker for the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. The Delta Farm Press reports Mississippi Senators Thad Cochran and Roger Wicker had to defend the program. Cochran placed the provision in the 2008 Farm Bill, but it's been a slow road to get it implemented. The two say the catfish inspection program is about food safety and not obstructing catfish imports. The FDA presently only inspects about 1% of the seafood imported in the United States. The USDA, on the other hand, inspects all farm-raised beef, pork, and poultry imported into the U.S. Wicker says more than 98% of imported catfish contain harmful contaminants not allowed in catfish grown here.
Well, let's check on the Mississippi Weekly Crop Report from the Mississippi Ag Statistics Service in Jackson. This report reflects conditions as of last Sunday, the 24th. Last week's cool spell and the recent rain have slowed down planting and crop development. As we look at topsoil moisture, it's surplus in 37% of the state, adequate 53%. Mississippi corn, none of the crops silking. That's 7% is the average for the state. Mississippi rice, 82% of the crop has emerged. Mississippi soybeans, 81% planted, 72% emerged. Mississippi cotton, 79% planted, 63% emerged. As we look at Mississippi wheat, 97% of the crop has headed, 82% of the crop coloring, 0% of the crop is harvested. It's normally 13% for this state.
Have you ever been to the grocery store to buy some beef and been confused by all the different cuts? Well, in this week's episode of The Food Factor, Natasha Haynes of the Mississippi State University Extension Service gets a lesson from the Mississippi Cattlemen's Association on how to pick the right one.
Steak recipes. There's so many choices. Skirt steak, ribeye, brisket, shank. What is a shank? I need help. Come in?
Hi, I'm Nancy Strickland with Mississippi Beef Council.
Well, that's convenient.
Natasha, it helps to know what part of the animal the meat comes from. The most tender cuts are from the loin and the rib, like sirloin or New York strip steaks. These are favorites for on the grill. cuts from the chuck area are more economical but can be tougher. So you should use moist cooking methods such as a slow cooker. The round area produces a wide variety of cuts like London broil or the eye round steak. Cuts tend to be leaner but also tougher. Marinades are a great way to add some flavored tenderness.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Now I know. It's time to make healthy food a factor in your life.
For even more information on beef, visit the Mississippi Cattlemen's Association website at www.mscattlemen.org.
Mississippi has a lot to offer in native plants. In this week's Southern Gardening segment, Extension horticulturist Dr. Gary Bachman shows us some pretty native plants that will fit easily into your landscape.
In the woods and fields of Mississippi, there are beautiful native plants that are also right at home in our gardens and landscapes. In this state, we're all familiar with pink indica azalea, but there are also several varieties of native azaleas which typically begin to bloom in late March on nearly naked stems. The flowers can be up to 1.5 inches across, but it's the way the stamens and pistil extend out of the flower that I find most attractive. The late afternoon backlighting of these false-tailed bracken ferns creates an almost ethereal glow. The upright growth of cinnamon fern has a strong vertical texture, while the fertile fronds resemble cinnamon sticks that look almost good enough to eat. Multiflora rose is a scrambling plant that is often seen on fence rows and on the edge of woodlands. The flowers are produced in large white to pink clusters beginning in late spring to early summer. A great plant found in wet areas is blue flag iris. These flowers are a light violet blue with a yellow patch towards the petal base. Each petal has artistic dark veins streaking the petals. A bright yellow flower that is a favorite of mine belongs to Coreopsis. Commonly called tick seed, this flower brightens roadsides and is the state wildflower of Mississippi. And a popular late spring bloomer is blue phlox. Despite the name, the flower color ranges from blue to lavender and pink. When you see these plants, don't go dig them up. Ask your local garden center for these Mississippi native plants for your landscape. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman for Southern Gardening.
Latent native plants have one more advantage because they're developed here. They're used to the extremes of our southern climate. In our feature segment today, we pour it out without much thought, but today we'll show you the work it takes to produce maple syrup in the northern U.S. Time now for the markets with Leighton. And Leighton, you say somewhat of a surprise in the Cattle on Feed report?
That's right, Artis, and Brian Williams will be along here to explain those numbers in a moment. Also ahead this week, the hog sector may still be expanding. It's a possibility that Texas flooding impacts the cotton market, while acres and yield are described as big soybean factors as far as future market direction. The monthly Cattle on Feed report was released as the Memorial Day weekend began. Extension Ag economist Brian Williams says some of the figures came close to what analysts were expecting, but not all of them. He talked to me on Wednesday. Well, Brian, did the Cattle on Feed report have much impact on the markets when it was released?
Well, it really, while the report itself was considered bullish, it really didn't have too much of an impact. I was looking at the futures, and live cattle futures really didn't change much at all, and feeder futures really just went up very slightly.
Well, let's talk about some of those individual numbers when we talk about marketings, placements, and total on feed.
Well, looking at the numbers, total cattle on feed was up about 0.8%. That was a little bit lower than expected. Placements were down 4.6%, which was quite a bit lower than what analysts were expecting. And then marketings were down 7.8%, which was real close to what the expectations were.
So why that one surprise, placements being down? What was the driving force behind that?
Well, I think if you've been watching the news a lot, think about Texas. And the last several years, they've been in drought year after year after year. Well, this year they've got flooding. And so with all that rainfall that they're seeing in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, they're getting a lot better pasture conditions, and so we're seeing producers keep those cattle on grass as well as increased heifer retention to try to build their herd.
Well, despite that surprise, so to speak, generally would you say this was a friendly report for the cattle?
I'd say so for two different reasons. Number one, the smaller numbers in placements and stuff, it's considered bullish especially for our cow-calf producers. But then on the other hand, it's showing that the conditions are favorable to increase the herd size with the improved pasture and stuff. So from a couple different directions, I'd say, yeah, it's a friendly report.
Now, talking about feeder cattle in particular, it seems like if you read the commentaries, the analysis, kind of bullish right now.
Yeah, looking down the road, you know, we're on one hand, there's fewer feeder cattle going into the feedlot, and they need those cattle to try to keep their numbers up. So that's really helping there. Plus, we've seen lower feed costs for the feedlots, so they're willing to pay a little bit more for those feeders as well.
Now, as far as like boxed beef, I mean, we've seen those prices not only hold, but they've been actually a little bit higher.
Yeah, the retail April retail monthly average for beef prices was hit a record high at just over $6.40 a pound.
Moving from cattle to hogs now, many traders seem to think the pork sector may still be expanding. However, many in this market may begin taking a much more cautious approach as the month of May ends. Analyst Don Rose offered this assessment.
Well, seasonally, the hog market's doing what it usually does. It usually rallies $25 a hundredweight from the winter to the summer highs. You know, we're running into that type of a range again. We think it's fully dialed in, the bull story. And if you look at the numbers that the government puts out, the hogs were over the projections that the government has. Remember, for the fourth quarter, they're really in that $57 to $63 range on the fall months. In October, you know, when it gets up 73, 75, looks pretty lofty. So we don't think that the expansion has been halted. We think the grain prices are too low. So we'll see on the next hog and pig report, but overall we're still supply bearish on the hogs on this rally.
Time to break for a trivia quiz on Farm Week. Our subject is a familiar activity of the recently passed holiday weekend. How many U.S. homes cooked on a grill Memorial Day weekend? Is the answer A, 41%, B, 57%, C, 69%, or D, 78%? You'll find out in just a few more minutes.
We're going to pause for a short break on Farm Week. Coming up, we'll look at the calendar and the rest of the markets. Leighton Spann says weather is the key to cotton prices, while yield is the key to the new crop soybean market. In the feature segment today, it tastes so good we would make it in the South if we could. I'm talking about maple syrup, and Vermont is the nation's largest producer.
Each year, many Mississippians are seriously injured or killed when farm tractors overturn. One cause of these accidents is improper hitching. If a tractor is hitched at any point above the drawbar, it can flip over backwards. Never hitch a tractor using the bar between the three-point hitch upper and lower links or at the top link attachment point. The stationary drawbar is the only safe location for tractor hitching. A message from the Mississippi State University Extension Service.
Before we get back to the markets, let's look at the Farm Week calendar. The annual Vegetable Field Day at the Beaumont, Mississippi Horticulture Unit of Mississippi State University takes place Thursday, June 4th. The unit's located north of Beaumont on Highway 15. Admission is free and there's no need to pre-register. Registration will start at 8 that day. Home gardeners and commercial gardeners, growers will find something of interest at the field day. Information on high tunnel production will also be available. MSU horticulture scientists will be on hand to answer questions. Free youth ATV safety classes are being offered June 8th through the 13th in West Point. They'll take place at the Jimmy Bryan 4-H Youth Complex behind the Mossy Oak Mall. They're open to 8 to 16-year-olds. 2 classes a day will be held at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Those who complete the classes will receive a free helmet. Pre-registration is a must. We will have the phone number on our calendar, or you can contact your county office of the Mississippi State University Extension Service. Go to our Farm Week website at farmweek.msucares.com for information on these and other events. Now check out this week's Farm Week Snapshot.
We move into the row crops market now. We begin with cotton, where ag economist O.A. Cleveland says there's a bias for higher prices for new crop, due in part to weather. He notes that given the loss of cotton acreage in Texas due to floodwater and grain prices, cotton could move to the mid-70s. In addition, U.S. cotton exports continue to provide solid support and may even exceed the current USDA estimate. Well, Delta Farm Press says June 30th is shaping up to be a red letter day for soybean farmers. That's when the USDA releases its acreage forecast for all crops. Those numbers will give bean growers a better idea of how big the crop could be and how low soybean futures could go. Analyst Mark Gold thinks the loss of some bean meal demand due to avian flu is not really a market mover, but that those acreage and yield projections will definitely be one.
I think the beans will have a little bit tougher go in here, but if the dollar comes down, we can see that. One of the things certainly that's hampered the bean market has been the meal market because of the bird flu. We don't know what the bird flu, how much longer it's going to last. Is the warmer weather going to kill off the virus and see things improve? We don't know that. We saw some more cases in Iowa here just in the last 24 hours. The numbers are, significant, but really, when you look at total poultry production, it's a drop in the hat. And yeah, can we lose 20, 30 million bushels of corn demand, some meal demand out here? We can, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the big issue going forward, which is acres and yield being the biggest factor there.
According to a new study, Americans are spending the money they save now at the gas pump on food. Consumers save an average of $67 a month compared to what they used to spend on gasoline. The report says most of those extra dollars are being used at restaurants and grocery stores. In fact, for the first time, Americans spent more money in restaurants than on groceries, according to Acosta Sales and Marketing. That first happened in December and continued into April. Back to trivia now to wrap things up for this week in the markets. B is the right answer. The Hearth, Patio, and Barbecue Association says roughly 57% of U.S. homes cooked on a grill last weekend.
In the feature segment today, maple syrup. It's an annual spring rite that's grown into a business. Vermont is the nation's top producer. Josh Bittner of Market to Market says syrup making has modernized, but it's still hard work.
Our country's earliest sugar makers were firmly rooted in their craft well before Europeans arrived. But it was the union of native tradition and colonial technology which laid the groundwork for North America's enduring maple syrup production model.
Nowhere else in the whole world does the sugar maple tree grow naturally, and we don't plant it. Out of every 5 hardwood trees in New England, 2 of them is the sugar maple tree.
While much of the country turns the page on Old Man Winter, states like Maine, New York, and Vermont typically undergo an early spring freeze-thaw cycle, spawning a woodland sucrose infusion. With temperatures seesawing from overnight freeze to 40 or 50 degrees during the day, the tree's root system gains access to fresh water. Plant starches are nourished, kickstarting a saccharine windfall that lasts an average of 6 weeks with favorable weather. Once the sole means to an end, metal buckets still hang out in the rural Northeast this time of year. A reminder that the seeds of this sugar-coated culture were sown in nostalgic soil. Many producers opt to bring the forest to them by installing intricate networks of vacuum tubing.
They're not moving.
Roughly 10 taps feed a main line, which uses gravity-induced suction to expedite sap downhill for refinement. Tim Taft, a 4th-generation sugar maker, runs 650 lines on 100 acres of sugar bush, or forest, near Huntington, Vermont. And while tubing is a cost-effective way for the family operation to move raw liquid, maintaining an infrastructure that can be compromised by weather and wildlife requires constant vigilance.
So I'm just going to re-drive this spout and fix the problem. Mother Nature has her way of keeping us under control. This year we had a really bad snowstorm, lost power for 5 days, broke a lot of tree branches. Took us somewhere around 600 man-hours to clean up the branches that were all on our lines, holding our lines down in the snow.
Besides upkeep, several intensive procedures overlap in the journey from tree to barrel. Raw maple sap is approximately 98% water. But through a kind of sugar house alchemy, the balance of sucrose to water is flipped on its head.
This is a reverse osmosis machine to concentrate our sap from raw sap closer to syrup where it would be ready to go in our evaporator.
Boiling off excess water pushes the elixir's sugar content to nearly 70%. But 40 gallons of sap reduces to just 1 gallon of syrup.
Syrup last year that we sold was $2.60 a pound, and that's a pretty fair price.
Every spring, timber sugars off to transactions in over 20 states. And while the sweet stuff flows as far south as some portions of the heartland, the undisputed king of U.S. maple syrup production is Vermont. According to USDA, the Green Mountain State accounted for 40% of the over 3 million gallons of the nation's maple syrup in 2014.
It's a tens of millions of dollar enterprise. It employs an ever-increasing number of people. It's attracting all kinds of entrepreneurs. It's our fastest growing ag sector in the state of Vermont. It is probably the most valuable thing you can do with your land if you've got a good sugar bush to work with.
Farms like Taft, Milk, and Maple offer a textbook example of classic Vermont agriculture. Year-round dairies with seasonal sugaring operations. But some producers have abandoned the volatility of dairy to scale up on maple alone, despite weather uncertainties and short harvest windows. Brandon Family Maple Orchards are 7th-generation sugar makers who see larger opportunities for this variety of sweetener.
I think the future looks really bright. I think more people are understanding the benefits of maple. It's got a low glycemic index, so it breaks down in your body real slowly, and which is a lot better than other sugars that hype you up. So this is as natural as it gets.
According to the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association, an industry promotion group, antioxidant levels in maple syrup exceed those of raw cabbage, tomato, and cantaloupe, while the sticky substance's vitamin and mineral levels outweigh most comparable sugars. Maple fights an uphill battle for market share with sugarcane and sugar beets, but the syrup's arch nemesis could be the offshoot of one of America's largest cash crops.
You always got to read the label because sometimes it's false advertising.
Yeah, Aunt Jemima's not the most welcome person in Vermont, that's for sure.
On average, grocers stock more flavor-enhanced imposters than genuine maple syrup. And the disparity is attributed to price. Overabundant corn is simply cheaper and easier to produce.
That's really where our competition is. It's not New York State, it's not Maine, it's not Quebec. It's those corn syrups that people think of as maple syrup.
Maple advocates make their argument on quality, not price, touting the health benefits of pure product over highly processed food additives. But the American maple industry is somewhat accustomed to riding shotgun. While Vermont is the domestic leader, Canada, led by Quebec, rules the world in maple production, churning out 12 million gallons per year. The U.S. has worked with its northern neighbors in recent years to replace a convoluted American maple syrup grading system with a universal standard for both countries. According to the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, the province's market share has actually dropped over the past decade, from 80 to 72%, while the U.S.'s portion has increased from 16 to 23%.
Strategic reserve really helps us in Vermont because it really sets the floor for the price of syrup, and it has helped to stabilize the prices quite a bit.
Canada imposes legal quotas on producers and stockpiles surpluses in its strategic maple reserve in order to control supply and demand. Exchange rates offer competitors on both sides of the border advantages for moving product, but buyers value quality.
The big wholesalers will purchase syrup for a little bit more usually if it is Vermont or U.S. versus Canadian. But then the U.S. dollar versus Canadian dollar is also another big deal. And this year, with the U.S. dollar being stronger, it makes it more advantageous for them to go to Canada and buy syrup.
While several New England producers try their hand at retailing maple products themselves to control income and pricing, Some of the commodity is repackaged in bulk for worldwide markets. Sealed in barrels, syrup will keep indefinitely, giving a little wiggle room to the laws of supply and demand.
If the market demand goes up and syrup gets short, they'll start to pay a little bit more for it.
But if the sweet smell of success doesn't boil over this year, America's maple sugar makers will try their luck tapping into revenue next season.
So now I'm going to drive it back in again.
For Market to Market, I'm Josh Bittner.
And you can watch this story again on maple syrup production on our Farmweek website. That's farmweek.msucares.com. You can also watch Farmweek stories on our Farmweek USA Facebook page and YouTube. You can also go to the Market to Market website where you can see the original story as well as read the script. We're also available at twitter.com/Farmweek. And I'm ready to go get some pancakes.
Makes you hungry.
And some maple syrup. They go so well together. Well, we are at the end of Farm Week for this week. On our next show, you've heard of farmers. Well, there's Farm Her.
This project seeks to document the many ways women are involved in agriculture. The subjects range from conventional to unconventional operations.
In the food factor, water. We know it's good for us, but it's even better than you think.
But there are others.
The water theme continues in the next Southern Gardening. See how to keep your potted plants moist by using sub-irrigation.
For the rest of the Farm Week crew, I'm Artis Ford.
And I'm Leighton Spann. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.